So this is my first time up on this side of the barrier, so forgive me if I make a few mistakes. Miqdad and Kamel asked me to talk about my time that I spent in Lesvos and Calais last year, well, end of last year and beginning of this year, just to kind of share my experiences. So a little bit about me. My name is Shireen. I graduated from King's as a dentist in 2013, currently working in the Royal London Hospital. I'm due to start medicine in September, potentially hoping to be a surgeon if I don't give up halfway through. Inshallah. Okay, so the refugee crisis, what's been going on? Okay, so I went to Lesvos with a charity that I heard about from my friends, who's currently they're currently running a medical mission in the Greek island of Lesvos. Lesvos is the top one that's circled. The others are Samos, Chios, and Kos, which the refugees are making their way to from Turkey. So they're pretty much traveling from Syria and Iraq, traveling all the way through Turkey and commandeering a boat and going to the Greek islands. Which you saw before. Oh, okay. So what's been happening in Lesvos, basically, Lesvos has always been one of the areas where refugees find themselves first when they're escaping from the Middle East. Middle East, as we know, has been in a time of conflict forever. And since the Arab Spring 2011, it's escalated significantly. They've been landing there for a while, but recently it's, in 2015, become drastically increased. Lesvos is an island of 90,000 people. It's got a very small population. Over the summer of 2015, there was a significant increase in the number of people landing there. And over the whole of 2015, 450,000 refugees found their way to Lesvos. On the 30th of July, David Cameron described them as a swarm of migrants making their way to the EU. This is when they first started coming to attention to us, not really very significantly, but it's when we first started hearing about them. Worldwide, according to the UNHCR, there are 59.5 million refugees. It's almost 60 million, which is the population of Great Britain. In 2013, there were 51.2 million, and now there are 59.5. 10 years ago, there were just 37.5. So over the course of 10 years, it's almost doubled the number of refugees in the world, according to the UN. In 2013, it equated to a daily increase of 42,000 refugees. Of these, 4,812,000 are Syrian. And that was from as of 2 days ago, according to the UN. By sea, in 2015, 800,000 had arrived in Lesvos. And by 2016, 143,000 more had arrived. So this is in the 3.5 months we've had, 2016, almost 150,000 refugees have arrived in Lesvos. Of these, 91% of them are from the top 10 refugee-producing countries of the world, Syria being the first. 48% of them are Syrian. I think I have some statistics. I'm not very good at this. It's not working. There we go. So this is the number this is basically from the UN as of 2 days ago that have been coming into Lesvos. This is over 2015. So you can see the light blue ones. In January, there was almost nothing. In October, there were 200,000 that landed in Lesvos just in that month. And most of them are Syrian. Next one's Afghani, Iraqis, Iranians, Moroccans, and Pakistanis. The rest come from other countries such as Somalia, Eritrea, a multitude of African countries. Over the last 3 decades, the biggest refugee-producing country was Afghanistan, and that held that for 30 years. Last year, Syria overtook them. So yeah. This is basically the routes that they get to Lesvos and the Greek islands, and the way they get to the EU. So they come from Turkey. All of the points across the west coast of Turkey, they find boats. They go through all of those to all of the Greek islands along there that are closest to Turkey. Somehow they find it's Athens in the middle, and they travel up to the north and try and cross the border to Macedonia. And from there, most of them are trying to get to Germany, because Germany is one of the only countries that have said they're going to take some refugees in. So Elan Kurdi is the reason why we now care about the refugees. So on the 2nd of September, he was traveling from Bodrum in a boat with his father, his brother, and his mother. His father was the only one that survived the journey. And in the morning of the 2nd of September, his body, along with 12 others, was washed up on the shores of Bodrum. And this photo went viral. And this is what made the refugee crisis something that the public demanded we do something about, and something that the governments of the EU countries couldn't ignore. To be honest, making this talk was a lot harder than I thought it would be, this picture being one of the hardest things that I had to look at last night. There's two sides to this conflict. There's a political side and there's a humanitarian side. The political side is very easy to manage. It's something that none of us really know. No one really knows who's the good and the bad in this war. No one really understands it. It's politics. It's something that you can discuss objectively. The humanitarian side is something that I've experienced to some extent. It's something that you can't really argue with, because this is it. It's something that's completely unacceptable. If in a world where I can hold a computer in the palm of my hand, we have children dying needlessly. And this is something that it's just so incredibly difficult to swallow. And you almost just can't believe we're even letting it happen. If an alien saw this from the sky and saw what we're doing, it's almost laughable, to be honest. So yeah, this is what started off the real surge in attention towards Lesvos, to be honest with you. When I was there, we met some people that had been there for some months. We were there at the end of November. Some of the people had been there since July. In July, there was hardly anyone on Lesvos. There were a few people who were there because they felt they had to be. They were there helping independently. They essentially just stayed there, took people in from the beaches, gave them somewhere to stay, and drove the refugees in their cars to the port in Mytilene, where they can get a ferry to Athens, or the airport where they can get a flight. When this picture got out, there was a surge in basically NGOs, people moving to Lesvos and going to help. Right now, there are over 81 NGOs on the island of Lesvos. An island of 90,000 people is so many NGOs now, and an NGO, I think, probably is defined as more than two people going there at once and getting matching T-shirts. Only 30 of these are registered with the local authorities. At this point in time, probably there's more volunteers than refugees on the island, and it's probably because of the media surge. And what I wanted to highlight specifically is that Lesvos is one island. There is, like I've showed you before, there's about 7 islands that are bordering Turkey, which, to be honest, I didn't even know were receiving any refugees until I went to Lesvos. And for some reason, Lesvos gets all of the attention. So yeah. So this is the part. This is Lesvos. The northern coast is where we were based. Where we were based with our small NGO, where Molyvos is. A lot of the refugees are landing in Molyvos. Mytilene in the middle, right at the bottom near the airport. There are some refugees landing there as well, but most of them are landing along the north coast. So this is how it was organized when we were there. So the coast was split into 3 zones 1, 2, and 3, and this is for the medical missions which were covering it. Our charity was Zone 1 on the left. Zone 2 was manned by a group called Refugee Foundation, who were working with WAHA, which is a French medical charity. And Zone 3 was manned by a group called Israel, which stands for Israeli Aid, which is interesting. Funnily enough, none of them were volunteers. They were all paid to be there. So this is us. There's me in the middle. So we were working on, this was the main beach where we were meant to be on call. There's how it essentially works there's lots of people who are medical, lots of people who are general humanitarians, and there are lots of people who go out into the sea and bring the boats and help the refugees onto the shore. The people in red are the Greek lifeguards, who are amazing people. They essentially just stake out the beach. They sit there 24 hours a day with a fire, and they all sing songs. We all shared our songs. They sound very Arabic, which is nice. And they just wait for boats to come. When the boats come, there's someone there all the time. They've got little tents, so you can just see on the right of the photo the big tent there. There's a couple of those tents that are full of clothes, full of toys for kids. They were making tea, making food. So essentially the refugees come there, they can get changed, and then we have a couple of minibuses which we ferry them to the camps. So that's pretty much, so how it works is that they come in like this, and as you can see, there's actually more volunteers there than refugees in this picture, which is funny. A lot of people are there to shake their hands. Most people in the water are there to get them safely onto the beach. They come onto the shore. We help them off, make sure they're all okay, make sure no one's ill or injured. We can give them some warm clothes, especially the children. We undress them, give them some warm clothes, get them dry, give them something to eat. And there are some buses which run them to camps called transition camps. So there are 3 transition camps. There's one called Scala, one called Oxy, and one called Lighthouse Camp. So essentially these camps are just where they sit for the day. They get some food, and then they take them to the main camp in the center of the island called Moria, which I'll talk about in a second. So the transition camps, they don't usually spend more than one night there, where they just basically get fed and watered, and then they move on. So that's pretty much, so when the refugees come off the boat, it's complete chaos. There is some of the times the boats come, depending on who you're with, it's very ordered, and we try and calm them down, especially at night. Some of the crossings at night were, especially with the people who were less affluent, they were completely crazy, and the people are jumping off the boats halfway out into the sea, running in, children are going missing, kids are being thrown to random people to get them changed, no one knows what's going on, and it's all very chaotic and very scary. And as you can see, when the boats come near the shore, we pass the children to the front so that they can be carried off. In this picture, you can't tell who belongs to who. No one speaks the same language. It's all very, very confusing. It can get very stressful, and this is how people get lost and people go missing. But, I don't know how I did that. But yeah, so this is basically one of the cheaper boats. So there are 2 types of boats that land on the shores of Lesvos. There is this inflatable kind, which generally you find is full of Afghans because it's cheaper. It's made of rubber and plywood that is moving. Well, it's basically like, so it's got the rubber frame and then just some wooden planks, and then those bits of wood at the bottom are just placed on top of them. So the water just gets inside the boat. So often when they get to the shore, the boat's halfway in the water anyway, and the people are waist deep, and the kids are completely soaked, and everyone's completely soaked, and everyone's panicking and scared, and they're all being sick all over each other, and it's completely chaos. What this guy's doing in this photo is slashing the boat, which is really important to do. If any of the volunteers or the refugees are seen throwing this boat back into the sea, it's considered helping the smugglers, and you could be arrested for people smuggling because you're giving the boat back to them. This actually happened to one of the guys that's there. He's a guy called Salam. He runs a charity called Team Humanity. He's been there since July. He's basically dedicated his whole life to the refugees in Lesvos. He's sold his house. He's formed this charity. He's given everything up to help these refugees. And a lot of the money that we were donated, we gave to him to buy a military-style Coast Guard boat that he can take out in an emergency if no one else can get there, to basically take people from the middle of the ocean in between the 2 countries and bring them back. When we were speaking to him, we spent quite a lot of time with him. He made it very clear that he's never going to use a boat to go out there and risk everything he's done unless it was an absolute emergency and that people were going to die. Because the Coast Guard are completely useless, to be honest with you. They don't really help anyone. He went out one night and and basically found some people almost neck deep in the water, rescued them, and he was then subsequently arrested. along with some Spanish lifeguards, and accused of people smuggling. And he has now been released on bail. He's not allowed to go back. He's from Denmark. He's not allowed to go back to Denmark. So he's now stuck in Greece on bail, awaiting trial, being arrested for people trafficking. So the volunteers there, I mean, a lot of them, the serious ones have been there. They're risking almost everything to be here. And the authorities are not making it very easy for anyone. Because, I mean, if you see a group of people who are drowning out in that sea, where the crossings on a good day last an hour, on a bad day last 8 hours, they're driven by refugees. One guy told us that he told one of the smugglers that he once drove a jet ski, and he said, "Fine, right, you're the captain," gave him the keys and then left. And then he had to drive them all across that. So you can see that's Turkey in the distance. So it's a couple of miles. And we were there, this was in November, so the sea is rough, the sea is freezing cold. And if you go out and rescue them, you could be arrested. So it's a very tricky situation. So what happens with the boats is that once the people are off them, you get swarmed. You get taken over by a group of Greek gypsies who then take all the materials, and then, I don't know what they do. It's a circle of life, I guess. They take them away and do something with them, I don't know. But yeah, it was just funny. They also take people's bags as well, so we had to chase them once. Yeah, it's funny. This was full of refugees before. This is actually after. I actually lost all my photos because I reset my passcode on my phone after a night shift and I couldn't remember what it was. So some of these photos aren't that good. So these are all donated photos, actually. This is one of the nice boats that people get if they can afford it. So generally the people that land on Lesvos, the refugees, the ones that get here or get there, are the rich ones. They're the ones that have money to pay for even the worst kind of crossing. This was a good crossing. This was before we emptied it. There were refugees. Anywhere you could stick a person, there was someone on it, hanging off, whatever. There's actually a guy in a wheelchair on this one as well. I think I've got a very bad photo of it. So you can see the wheelchair in the corner there. That woman in the white headscarf, those guys were going out to help her off, and she was actually hilarious. She must have been about 60 years old or something, and you think that she would be very frail and that she'd need all these people to help her off. They put out their hands to help her off the boat, and she hit them all away and said, "No, I'm getting off myself." She climbed down herself, walked all the way to the shore. The water was up to here on her, screaming and celebrating that she's made it. And she was Iraqi, so if anyone here is Iraqi, they would know exactly what she was doing. And she was screaming. She ran onto the beach and started screaming and doing sujood on the beach, and she was amazing, and everyone was laughing and celebrating with her. She was so cool. It was just funny because you thought you'd really need to help these people, but actually most of these people are completely fine, which is the point I made about more volunteers and refugees on this beach. People think they all need help. Most of them are healthy and they're just so happy to be there. And they're just celebrating, really. So this picture's a little bit hard to decipher on the screen, but on that stretcher on the rope is a man who was in the wheelchair, and we had to basically put him on this stretcher and balance him on the rope and slide him across the rope over the water onto the beach, which happened very, very, very successfully. You can see all of the journalists being very excited about it. But that was a really nice team effort, actually. And he actually was traveling alone. I don't know what happened to his family. Do you remember? Yeah, he didn't tell us. But he made a friend on the boat, and then they went on together. But yeah, he was alone. So this is a picture that I took, actually, because it's something that put me in two minds a lot. When we were on the beaches, half the people are volunteers, a fifth of them are refugees, and the rest are journalists. And that guy actually on the right is wasn't a very nice one, but it makes you think, because we wouldn't know about any of these things without these journalists. But considering the disproportionate attention that Lesvos gets in the media, and the number of people there just taking photos of this boy, I don't even know where his mother was at this point. And a lot of the kids, when they come off these boats, are completely unresponsive. They're just in shock. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what's happened to them. All these people are grabbing them and undressing them, and it's all very scary. And you just get a whole group of people taking photos of them, and it just seems very, very zoo-like at this point. And it doesn't sit well, but you know it needs to happen. But a lot of the journalists there, They're almost like vultures. And one of the friends I was with, I think she was about 7 or 8, this girl who was completely soaked, so we were undressing her. And he came behind her and started taking photos of her undressed. And it's just really, really weird because you just can't even understand someone would do that. And then it was actually that guy, the guy on the right. And he then shouted at her back saying, I'm like some award-winning war journalist and this is my job and blah, blah, blah. But you just think nothing is worth that. So anyway, so when they get off the beach, this is one of the transition camps. This is one of the 3. This is the one that we basically ran a clinic in this camp. The big tents are essentially where they spend the night if they need to. They're just tents with wooden floors with some rugs over them. The UN give them some blankets and that's it. They are fed by NGOs. They're clothed by NGOs. They get there by NGOs, and the UN provides coaches that takes them to the main camp where they get registered. It's the kind of place where they can't really forget their refugees, to be honest with you. This camp actually is run by an amazing charity called the Starfish Foundation. So the Starfish Foundation is one of the biggest organizations there, and it's very, very ad hoc and informal. It was essentially started by a lady who runs a restaurant called Captain's Table in Lesvos. This is the restaurant where basically all the volunteers go to eat. Half of them live there. It's an English woman who, in 2014, I think it was approached by the authorities for help because some refugees had come to the island and they needed some food. So she fed them and helped them and drove them to the ferry port. So right now it's probably got over 100 people who have volunteered for them. They only want people who can volunteer for more than a month. And she basically runs this camp. They provide all the food. They do all the logistics. They've got a big warehouse full of clothes that they organize and they give out to the refugees. It's a really cool charity. The women's amazing for doing it, and it was all just kind of just accumulated as the crisis did. And it's not a big organization or anything like that. It's just called Starfish. I don't even know why it's called Starfish, to be honest with you. But if anyone wants to go out there, I can help you get in touch with them. So yeah. This is the main camp called Moria. The reason why this picture is particularly rubbish is because you're not allowed to take pictures in this camp. I think it used to be a playground, but I'm not sure. It's either a playground or a prison camp, and I don't know why I can't decide between the two. Right now, it reminds me of a prison camp, so I'm just going to call it a prison camp. You can see it's got all the barbed wire and the big fences. This place was absolutely awful. At this point, we were there in the nighttime. We went there to give out blankets and tents. And we were absolutely terrified when we were there. The guy that drove us there went off somewhere. He found a friend or something. So we were just stuck by ourselves. And it was really scary. It's like, I don't know. So all those people in tents are not in the official camp. The official camp, at this point in time we were there, was half empty. So this is the camp where they go to be registered to apply for asylum. They register there and then they can go on to wherever they want. They can get transportation to the ports to go to Athens, or they can go to the airport and take a flight to Thessaloniki, which is in the north of Greece. This camp is very interesting because the people basically wait outside to be registered. They're registered on a priority basis, and it goes Syrians, Iraqis, Afghans. Why Afghans are always at the bottom of the list, I do not know, because they've been refugees for the past 40 years, and they will never be at the top of the list. Some of them are waiting 4 days, and what happened is that this camp is basically 3 camps now. There's the main camp on the inside, which is half empty. If you're lucky enough to get in, you will get essentially a fallout shelter. It's a shed that's dark and dirty. It's got a hardwood floor with no windows, no electricity, no heating. You might get some food, and then you're expected to stay in there until the morning when you can get transportation to wherever you want to go. That's if you get inside. On the outside, there are 2 hills. This is the top of one of them. One of them is called Afghan Hill, and one of them was called Iraqi Hill. It's actually quite necessary to separate people into this because this is what happens in Macedonia where people have fights. So Afghan Hill was a big exposed, big exposed hill, just full of tents and mostly men. It's absolutely freezing. It's completely filthy. It's a public health disaster. There is no toilets. There's no showers. There's actually no toilets or showers. I don't think even in the main camp. To be honest, I didn't see anything. And they're just waiting to be registered to get into the main camp. So if you consider this is the beginning of December, and this is a big exposed hill on an island, so it's just cold, freezing wind at you all the time. And they don't know how long they're going to be there. And a lot of them don't even bother going to this hill because if they lose their place in line, they might not ever get into the camp. So it's just really, really, it's just impossible. I just can't believe this is even happening there. So actually, in the nighttime, we had people who were getting raped there because it's mostly men. It's completely pitch black, dark. So people can find their way into each other's tents, do whatever. You've got no one to tell. So it was horrible. And when we were there, we just felt really, really unsafe. And the whole of the time, this is about a week after we got there, the whole time we were there, we felt fine, but this wasn't a very nice place to be. Aside from the fact that actually interspersed with the refugees were a lot of gypsies who you couldn't really tell the difference between, and gypsies were actually stealing things from the refugees. They were either stealing things or selling them food at extortionate prices, and the food that the gypsies were selling was the only food that I saw there, so I don't know where else anyone was getting any food to them from. That seemed to be their only source. So where I took this picture from is from a medical clinic that an American doctor and his wife made. So in Moria camp, which is this camp, MSF were there, but I think they have an agreement with the UN, so they can only operate inside Moria. They can't do anything outside of the camp. So obviously there was about 2,000 people on this hill, and it's freezing, and they've been traveling, this is midway through their journey, they've been traveling all the way from the Middle East, and they need people, they need doctors, they need everything. So this American doctor and his wife made a clinic on the top of the hill, and they actually put out a Facebook message on one of the multiple Lesvos groups saying they desperately needed dentists because they had a lot of people with big dental infections they didn't know what to do with. And it sounds trivial. A dental infection in this scenario is potentially fatal. I mean, I've seen it in my job in London, where we're in one of the most affluent countries in the world. I've seen people go to ITU for weeks after having a dental infection because they can't breathe, because the infection literally strangles them. In this situation where you have people who have been traveling without food or water, cold clothes for months and weeks, and they've all got a little bit of a chest infection, they're all malnourished, and then they get an infection of something, whether it be a wound or a tooth, it's something that can push them over the edge, and it's something that could potentially kill them. And in these situations, just prevention is just so important. And I mean, there is actually someone who went there and set up a little dental clinic, but she wasn't there when we were there. I don't know how often she can get there. Who can take out teeth and things. We didn't really have any of those facilities. All we can do is drain an abscess or give antibiotics. But it just highlights how powerless these people really are. When you don't have very much, something so small can give you so much trouble and put you in a really serious situation. And so, I mean, these doctors are doing what they can. And when we went there with one of the ladies who was traveling with us was a gynecologist, and she was helping some pregnant ladies, and we went out doing house calls. A lot of people are scared to come to the doctor, don't even know they're there, and they're hiding in the back of their shack, which the UN have given them. It's really important. So this was a little medical clinic, and this was the ad hoc dental clinic that we made. We saw some people and gave lots of treatments and things. One of the things that's actually probably most vital on this island, because there are probably more doctors there than in London right now. So if Jeremy Hunt wants anyone, he should probably go to Lesvos and find some people. They need translators who can speak Farsi. There's a lot of people who speak Arabic. A lot of the more affluent people, refugees, speak English anyway. It's the Afghans who speak Farsi who don't really have anyone who can help them. because there's just hardly any people who are there who can speak Farsi. And if anyone wants to go who can speak Farsi, you're probably the most needed people. So that would actually be a really big help. I remember at one point I was drawing like a sun and a moon and a clock on a box of antibiotics to give to someone because I didn't have any other way of saying when to take them. So yeah. So this basically was a very difficult day in this picture. So I didn't take this picture. I didn't take any pictures when I went there. One day we were driving to one of the clinics, and I got a call from someone from the Zahrat Trust. And I don't know how they knew I was in Lesvos. I don't even think they did know I was in Lesvos. They said, we need some help in Lesvos. And I said, I'm in Lesvos. What do you need? And they said, we desperately, desperately need some women who can help with the burial. And before I went, I had heard that people needed help with burials, and my gut reaction was like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't want to do that. I'm just going to go there, do what I can, then leave. I don't want to get involved with any burials. And so I told him, I was like, no, I'm sorry, I'm really busy. I can't. And I put the phone down. And that was just a gut reaction because I really didn't want to. As soon as I put the phone down, I thought, I can't really say no to this because you don't really have a choice. And the lady I was sitting next to asked who called, and I told her, and she said the same thing. She said, we can't really say no. And the two other ladies I was with said the same thing, so we can't really say no. So I called the guy back and said, I might be able to help. And he was like really, really grateful. He gave me the number so he was calling, the guy from Zahrat Trust was calling on behalf of someone else who was conducting some burials. And what we did is we spoke to them, we rented a car, we drove across the whole island. We didn't tell anyone. We were separated at that point, weren't we? And we just basically disappeared for the day. We rented a car and drove across the island to a forest in the middle of the island. It all got very ISIS at one point. I was scared that we were going to be kidnapped. Met a random guy who then said, follow me, took us deeper into the forest, and they went to a clearing, which was this. So these guys are just literally a bunch of guys who have gone there to help. They're all independent. They're not connected with an organization. And they have just been burying people for the past 3 weeks. So 3 weeks before we got there was a big storm. And how many people was it that died? It was a lot of people. I think about 124 people died in this storm. And the stories that we heard were babies being pulled out of the ocean, children, people hugging each other, and essentially these people had been dead and unburied for 3 weeks, which is the ones that we were doing. So this is all these guys were doing. I don't even know what is inside their heads anymore, to be honest with you. So they said, what I was told on the phone is that they needed help burying a body. When we got there were actually 3 that needed to be buried. And they needed to do them before Maghreb. I'd never done it before. 2 of the women I was with never done it before. One of the women I was with had done it with her sister, to her sister. So she had done it before. So we all took turns. There was one lady who had, up until then, been washing the bodies by herself, and I heard that she had done 30 by herself. And when we met her, she was I think she was just a shell of a human. I don't even know what would be in her head at that point. She had no time for chit chat. She was just on the point. No questions, no hellos, no nothing. She was just a robot at that point, and I can't blame her, to be honest with you. So we took it in turns, and she basically instructed us, and we helped her. And the one that I helped with was a young girl who must have been about 16, and she still had a bracelet around her wrist. So I know it's not very nice sharing this, but I think it's really important because it's the reality, and I couldn't believe it when I saw it. And when I got back to the hotel, my friend who I was sharing my room with wasn't there with me, and I didn't say a word to her all night, and I couldn't. And when we turned the lights off to go to sleep, I had tears running down my face because I couldn't sleep and I didn't know what to do. This girl's hair was still as it had been, and she'd been dead for 3 weeks, and her eyes had had almost melted into her face. And I just thought, all I could think of when I was sleeping was that if any of these leaders who were leading this war had to bury their own dead, then they wouldn't justify what they're doing. Because she died alone in an unmarked grave in a foreign land, leaving nothing for her family. Her family have nothing left of her. And I can't see any justification for a war where this is worth it. Yeah, so that was a really, really hard day for me. I haven't thought about it since then, to be honest with you. This is when it all came back. So it's really difficult because I just think that it doesn't matter who wins now. I don't know who's right, and whoever wins this war, I don't know what they've won, to be honest with you. We've all lost. Humanity, I think, is just lost now because this is what we have to do to each other. But yeah, so that's what happened about halfway through. On a happier note, this lady is called Anastasia. So we met her at Moria camp. She's an incredible woman. So she's from London. She's an art teacher. I think she's been traveling around for a while. Right now she's in Istanbul. She's created a small school for the refugees that are in Turkey, for the children. And she's got actually the adults, the refugee adults, helping teach the kids in the school, which is awesome. She created this art tent for the children in Moria who are stuck there and haven't got anywhere to go, and has used it for art therapy. She doesn't speak the same language as any of these children. Half the children don't speak the same language as each other, and she's just basically put a pen and paper in front of them and they just let them draw. But this is what they drew first. This is by an 8-year-old boy from Afghanistan. This is the first thing that he drew, which is quite heartbreaking. So you can see there's tanks and planes shooting at houses. Another one drew that. So raining on a boat in the sea. You have to wonder what's in their mind if this is the first thing they draw. And this one, to be honest, I think this one for me was one of the most heartbreaking because the people are falling off the boat and there are sharks in the water. And it just gives a small insight into what they're thinking even when they're on the boats. And I actually had an argument with someone on Facebook about one of these photos, which I couldn't believe I was having, about the fact that an 8-year-old boy is drawing a tank doesn't prove anything. And I'm not sure what we were arguing about, whether he's traumatized enough or whether he's normal. And this guy was a guy in England, so it's just kind of maybe an indication of how people are mentally separating themselves from what's actually happening in real life, but it's difficult to connect with because the news is the news, and we just see it as the news, almost like another episode of Game of Thrones. Anyway, so the kids got happier. She worked with them, and this is how amazing art therapy is, and they decorated their whole tent. They're looking much happier, and it's just amazing how they're all playing together. None of them speak the same language even. It's just really cool. And they love that tent, actually. One of the women didn't let any of the gypsy kids inside, which is quite sad. They had a big argument about it because some of the gypsy kids are stealing shoes. The other ones just wanted to draw. And then they had an argument about whether to let the gypsies' children inside the tent, which was quite sad because they're having an argument about that. But no, they all enjoyed it. And this was actually when we first, I think this is from recently, when we first went, it was a tiny tent that you couldn't even stand up in, like the size of that corner. So she's made it a lot bigger, and it's awesome. And they all love her, which is nice. Yeah. So where they go after getting to Lesvos, most of them are trying to get to Germany. And to do that, they need to either take a ferry to Athens, and from Athens they go northwards, or they take a plane if they can afford it. It's a domestic flight, so they don't need to get a passport to get onto it. So they can just go from the small airport in Mytilene, which is the capital of Lesvos. When we left Lesvos, we went to the Macedonian border to see the camp. We were warned not to take anything with us. We had a whole box of medications, 2 whole suitcases of medications that were extra, and we were warned not to take them with us because the Macedonian camp is really, really violent, and it's very disorganized, and it's a bit of a it's a bit chaotic, and they say if you take something with you, you'll probably get killed because you'll get overrun with people just taking it from your hands. And they said, especially if you're going to girls alone, just don't take anything. So we didn't, unfortunately. When we went to the airport to go to Thessaloniki, which is the northern airport, just up there at the top of the arrow, there was a Syrian family in the airport, and we recognized them. And actually, we had taken them out of the sea the day before, and it was actually really nice to see. They had found their way to the airport. They had enough money to get onto a plane and taking the same plane that we were to get to Thessaloniki, and they were heading for Germany. It was a lady with her daughter and her 2 brothers. Unfortunately, she had a son and a husband who was still in Syria, who they couldn't afford to get into Greece. They used all their savings to get onto a boat. But I'm glad they had enough to get onto a plane. So we all took the same plane, went to Thessaloniki, and from there, basically, you need to just find your way up towards the Macedonian border to the village of Idomeni, which is this. So the camps that we've all been hearing so much about, where people are sewing their mouths shut in protest at the border, this is it, basically. It's essentially a railroad line that goes from Greece to Macedonia, and they've just cut it off, and they've built a big razor wire fence across the railroad, across the whole border that you can't climb across. We spoke to some of the doctors at the Red Cross who were there, and they basically said that anything that happens at this camp is extremely slow, apart from the razor wire fence, which I'd never seen anything constructed faster. And that was, I think, a couple of days after we left. David Cameron went up there to inspect it and make sure it was tight enough. So yeah. When we were there, this camp is a really, really, really horrible place. It's not even a camp; it's a mass of people who are just waiting. They do let through some people on the same priority basis that they let the people into the Moria camp. Syrians first, women and children first, Iraqis, then Afghans, and then anyone else who they feel like letting in if there's space. Which basically is no one, because there's just Syrians and no one else. When we were there were two riot vans, riot police. There had been a riot 2 days before. There almost was a riot when we were there. We spoke to a guy who we had seen in Lesvos, who actually helped us translate from before. And he said, "I'm just waiting here. I don't know what to do." He was actually planning on making his way back to Athens because there was nothing for him there. It's absolutely freezing, and the people are just literally living it's like a shanty town now, just living in tents along the railroad, just waiting. That's all they're doing is waiting, and it was freezing, and there's almost no NGO presence there, which is interesting because in Greece, in Lesvos, there's a stupid number of volunteers there, and here there were, I think, 3 organizations that had basically one tent each. There was the Norwegian Red Cross, which were providing medical care. They had a line about 50 people long outside. All of the doctors were sick as well. There was MSF were there, Médecins Sans Frontières, and there was one humanitarian organization called Praxis, which is a Greek organization. They were the only people who were giving out any form of aid, blankets. I don't know if they were giving out food. They must have been, because I don't know where they're getting food from. And that's it really. And there's almost like a main camp area and the rest of it. And the main camp area is very, very small. It has the same UN kind of bomb shelters, and that's it. And interestingly, the UN in these situations, they put very, very big logos up. And that's what they're very good at, and they don't really do anything else. Their presence in Greece was very late indeed. They weren't there before October, September. And all they really do is they build these shelters, which are essentially just tarpaulin tents, and they provide some transportation, and that's it. The refugees are fed, they're clothed, they're medically treated by NGOs. MSF work with the UN, but in my opinion, they provide a very limited service in Greece, especially in the Moria camp, which I showed you before. They don't operate outside of that camp. And the camp was half empty. And MDM, which is another organization like that, Médecins du Monde, they were forced out in a turf war with MSF from Moria camp, and a similar thing happened in Calais. So in terms of medical volunteering, it's great to go with an organization that's very organized and official like MSF, but I think maybe the bureaucracy is limiting what they can do. And in this case, there were lines and lines of people outside, and either they don't have enough money to provide any more doctors, or they're not letting anyone else do any treatment there for a good reason, because you can't have random people providing medical care. But this camp is very neglected, and I don't know whether it's because it's an unpopular place. The media attention that was getting from Idomeni is very negative in the British media, and all you see really is the riots and the people sewing their mouths shut. And we saw where those people were protesting, but it was very close to where there's lots of fighting, and we didn't feel safe to go there. It's a very, very tense environment where you've got lots of people who are very exhausted and tired and frustrated mixed in a very small area. And there was a fight when we were there. Basically, we were there for an hour. So you can't even imagine. There are kids there. There are some families there. It's mostly men. But there was one lady who actually, my friend and I who were there, we noticed her, but neither of us mentioned it. We noticed her independently. There are kind of like porta potties, and she was sat at the step of one, and she had two toddlers next to her running around, and she had this look on her face of just complete despair, and she was just looking at the floor, and her face spoke 1,000 words of she just didn't know what to do. And you never want to see a mother looking like this with her children around her, and it's just you just don't know what to do. It's such a hopeless situation. So it's just a few more of the pictures of the tents there. And the people are all just loitering, really. They don't have anywhere else to go. And it's one of the little boys who's there, and it's absolutely freezing. And it's not an area where children ever need to be honest. So yeah, that's Greece. I went to Calais in January, so a couple of weeks after. I only went to Calais for a couple of days. I spent more than a week in Greece. And Calais was interesting because a lot of the people who were in Calais are the same people who land in Lesvos and Chios and Kos, and they basically made their way, and I've just met them at the other end. The refugees, when they land in Lesvos, they're very, very happy, and they think they've done the worst bit of their journey. They get off the boats, they run on the shore, and they're ecstatic and they're really happy, and especially when they see Muslims helping them, they're really happy to see one of their own. And it sounds silly, but just to have someone speaking their own language, to see someone who knows their customs and whatever, they're very, very happy. And you almost think, oh, you have no idea what else you have to do. And now they do, unfortunately. So in Calais, their plan is to jump onto the back of a lorry or to jump onto a train. That's their plan A. That's not plan B. That's not my visa didn't work, so I'm going to try this. That's their plan A, is to jump onto the back of something going in the direction of England. And they're just waiting to do that, basically. This is just part of it. This is about half of it. This is the one in Calais. There's one in Dunkirk as well. That little red dot is where we opened a small dental clinic in a caravan. That's where we were. There is about 5,000 people in Calais, and I think about another 2,000 or so in Dunkirk. So this is what it looks like. So the people are all living in just something. It's like basically just wood and plastic or tarpaulin or something. They've just got shelters, essentially. They're all just living. It's a complete shanty town. They have some porta potties. They have some running water, which they're using our toothbrushes in, which was great. But this is just what they live in. It's a really, really horrible place, Calais, and you almost feel bad thinking it's horrible, because I got to go back to my hotel. And you don't want to think it, but it's just horrible, and they know it's horrible, and they don't know what to do. So they're all making the most of it. In this part of Calais camp, there was it's mainly men, it's mainly Afghans as well. There's quite a lot of Eritreans there as well, actually, interestingly. There's not too many. There are some Syrians, but they're mostly men. The women and children are actually mainly in Dunkirk, and there's a small section of Calais where there's women and children. But It's an interesting place, actually. They have a little shopping street there with a shisha cafe in it. They've made their own community. It's kind of, maybe there's two sides to it. Yeah, so that's our little caravan. The caravan next to it, there's two medical caravans as well with doctors inside. So we were just seeing people all day we did dental treatments on them, extractions, fillings and things. There's people coming, loads of them. It actually felt really, really awful closing because we had to close an hour earlier than the doctors because we had to sterilize our instruments. I went there for a weekend. On the Sunday, I didn't know when anyone was coming back. And as soon as I was closing, there's just like a million people coming with pain and holes and everything. I just didn't know what to do. It was the hardest thing. I had to close because I was by myself and it was getting dark and I was going to miss my ferry and I had work in the morning. And it brings home that kind of despair that they have because I have that despair for them because I know, as a dentist, I know they're not going to get better because you have to treat them. Their body won't fight it, and I don't know when anyone's coming back. And a few weeks after this, I learned that they've moved that caravan, and we don't know where they've moved it to, and we don't know who moved it. And I think it was most likely the French authorities, because on the 29th of February, they've cleared a whole section of the camp. Essentially, the camp is next to the main road, which leads to the ferries. So they're all kind of just camping along that road and then just jumping onto the lorries. The French authorities have wanting to clear basically 100-meter space in between the camp and the road to make a buffer zone where they can't go. It's basically half of it they've taken away, and they haven't really given these people any option to go anywhere. So when we were there, there's 5,000 people there. The camp which the French authorities are leaving behind is a maximum of 2,000 occupants. And I say 2,000 occupants, the accommodation that they're providing is actually enough for 1,900 people, 400 women and children and 1,500 men. So I don't know where they're getting the extra 100 places from. And in one of the Guardian article that I read, they called it a more permanent accommodation. It's actually a shipping container. So I don't know whether they're actually going to ship them off physically. They're putting them in shipping containers and they're calling it accommodation. This leaves 75% of the people who are living there with nowhere else to go. Whether they're going to deport them or I don't know what they're going to do with them, they have to move to different camps along the northern French coast. I don't know how that solves the problem, to be honest with you, but that's what they're doing. But I think it's mainly just to clear the space between the camp and the road. And as of 1st of March, MSF, which is the only official medical organization in Calais, has only one clinic left for the 2,000 people. So you can imagine that's 3 doctors for the 2,000 people. And the rest they've given to the French authorities. When we were there, a couple of the dentists we were with went to Dunkirk, and MSF didn't really want them there. MSF don't provide a dental service. So in Dunkirk, half of them weren't allowed in because of the police, and the other half, MSF didn't want them there. So it's very political, even with the charities that are there. When we were in Calais, there was a little boy who came to us with toothache. He was 13. He was accompanied by this lady who was from Wales, who's a nurse, and she was working in the medical caravan. He had toothache, so we had a look at him and took out one of his teeth. His brother lives in Wales with the lady he was with. His brother was 19. They left Syria together with their parents. Their parents were shot on the way and both died. And he was separated from his brother in France. They tried to get onto a lorry or a train. His brother made it and he didn't, and he got taken back to Calais. So now he's living there by himself in this camp, 13-year-old boy. And his brother is living with this lady in Wales. And she is separating her time between Calais and Wales, trying to speed up the application for him to have asylum granted to him to go and live with his brother. So it's really hopeless. One of the patients that I had was a math student who was Syrian. He spoke perfect English. He's very educated. He said, "I was happy when I got to Greece, but now I don't know what to do." He just said he's stuck. So they have nowhere to go, really. So that was my experience. When I got back from Lesvos. The day I got back, the morning I woke up, my first morning back in my own bed, the first thing I saw in the news was a picture of the leaders of my very civilized, affluent, caring country celebrating a successful vote to bomb Syria. And seeing the fallout from the war that didn't include British bombing, I basically lost all hope. And I remember that morning crying in my bed because I'd seen the people die. I'd seen the children running away. I'd seen children handed to strangers from a boat where they had been for hours and hours, terrified of drowning, handed to strangers and random people. And then I came back to see my own government celebrating that we're going to bomb them for their own good. I can't really see an end to this, to be honest. The people are going to continue coming until they have nothing to run from. They're going to keep drowning in that ocean until they have nothing to run from. They need to stop coming. There needs to stop being a war. I think as a community, it's really important for us to be very organized in helping them. I think there's enough people in Greece helping. There's not enough people in Lebanon, there's not enough people in Jordan. Yemen has never made it onto the news in the past month, as far as I'm concerned. Interestingly, in my own reflections on the fact that one of the main charities in Lesvos was called IsraAid, I mean, aside from obvious prejudices, they were probably one of the most effective, well-organized charities on the island. They did the best work, they had the best doctors, they got there first every time, they're amazing, they spoke perfect Arabic. For what reason, I don't know why they had perfect Arabic. Considering what these people are running from, most of them are Arab, most of them are Muslim, running into the arms of an Israeli from Israel who's not volunteering there, they're all paid to be there. I'm not sure how they would feel about it, and it would be nice if there was a charity as well organized that was Muslim. And not because I think that Muslims should help Muslims, but I think that we're here, we feel for our own people, and yet me and my friends are one of the only people only women who are visibly Muslim there. So I don't know whether we need to become more organized as a community to help, because the people there are doing amazing things, and they're doing it because charity is what you need to do. And I don't think we have an obligation because they're Muslim, but I think that if we feel so strongly, we need to do something more than just feel strongly about it. Yeah, that's it. I'd like to invite for questions, but I think first if we can say Surah Fatiha for everyone that's died.
Salawat. We have some time for questions. Is there any questions from either side? Quite a lot of. Let me ask one. What is your feeling about people going by themselves versus with organizations? I don't know if you touched on this before I came, but...
It's difficult because there's no organization in Lesvos. Like I said, there's 81 NGOs there. There's very, very little cohesion. People come and they will criticize people that have been there for like this guy, people that have been there for months, and they'll say, you should do this better, you should do this better, and there's a system that seems to be working. There are a lot of people that are there by themselves, and they've been there for months, and they all know each other. There's like a whole community of people there now. I think at this point it's probably not useful unless you're going to go there for a significant amount of time. It's nice to go to an organization purely because organizations are organized, theoretically. He wants to join me. But I think if you're going to go there for a weekend, go with someone. If you're going to go there for 3 months, by all means, go by yourself.
When you talk to some of these people who'd come from Turkey, did they explain what kind of circumstances they were living in Turkey? I mean, presumably they were out of Syria, so they were safe in Turkey. Their life wasn't threatened, but they still chose to cross into Greece.
So in Turkey, they're not allowed to own property, they're not allowed to work, They're not really allowed to do anything apart from exist. It's not an end point for them, and I presume they want to stay. They're going to stay there until the end of the war, which probably won't be within the next few months. So Turkey is not really a solution for them, and the Turks don't really want them there. But to be honest with them, their main goal is to leave Turkey and get to the EU, and they have contacts with the smugglers. A lot of them had contacts from Iraq or Syria. Like basically, the smugglers themselves are Kurdish, they're Syrian, and they're Iraqi. One guy said he trusts this smuggler because his grandfather lives next door to my grandfather in Baghdad, and if he does anything wrong, then he's gonna come and get told off by his grandfather. So I trust this smuggler. So it's a very interesting system they've got going.
Any other questions?
Are there like any, I know you said there are many NGOs, but are there any like Muslim NGOs? I know about Zara Trust. I mean, are they well set in Lesbos or any other camps?
There is one other one. It's not really an official NGO. There's a group of people that basically have a WhatsApp group that was originally for coordinating the burials. It's literally just a group of random people from around the UK. I don't think there's any organised Muslim groups apart from the Zahra Trust, and even their presence there is very small. They're a small charity. There aren't any. All of the other organisations that are big and organised and noticeable, none of them are Muslim.
There's no Islamic Relief, Muslim Hands, all these other.
No, not that I saw.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for that insightful talk. I think this is a crisis that has been, there for such a long time, and that it needs like urgent action. In terms of organizations, I understand there is this organization called Zainabiyya, and they've been there since last year, December, till this year, and they're still running. And they're a big Muslim organization. In fact, they're a group of different Shia organizations coming together. I don't know if you've heard about that or you've seen their presence there.
I didn't come across them when I was there, but I was only in one part of Lesvos. I don't know whether they're just on Lesvos or they're on any of the other islands. So they might be around the south coast. They might be all the east coast. Around the north coast where we were, I didn't see anyone called Zainabiyya.
Okay. The other question was this area you were talking about like how everyone was just like concentrated over there, and they had just blocked down this railway. What place was that?
That's
called?
on the Macedonian border, so the northern border of Greece with Macedonia. It's a village called Idomeni. It's where the main crossing is to get into Macedonia.
Okay, and why are they still there, even though that they're not been given a place to actually?
They're letting in people very, very slowly, but they're letting them in based on a priority basis of Syrians have top priority, and then it goes Iraqi, Afghans, and then everyone else. A lot of people are there just to try their luck, or because they've got there, they didn't get the message that they weren't letting anyone in, and they have nowhere else to go. And a lot of people are there as a form of protest because Macedonia essentially have closed their borders because the EU told them to.
Thank you. Thank you.
How can they tell who they are? I guess they don't have papers.
Yeah, the ones that don't have papers are in a lot of trouble. The ones that do have papers are very lucky and they get through the fastest. We met a guy who he said he was Iranian, but I think he was from the border of Iraq and Iran, where it's a very grey area where you're from. And he had some papers that didn't really make any sense, that I think he's just trying to tell people that he's Iraqi. And yeah, it was literally just a paper. It wasn't a passport. And he had been there for some days, and we had seen him in Lesvos as well, and he wasn't really going anywhere. Yeah, so if you basically, when they come in the sea, a lot of them, I mean, in Izmir where they're getting the boats, they've made a whole trade and market out of selling life jackets and selling these little waterproof bags that they all have around their neck, which has got their mobile phone and their passport in. And that's like their most important thing. A lot of the life jackets, incidentally, don't have anything buoyant in them. They're filled with foam because they're fake. So people are selling them cheap, and they're actually helping them sink faster. which is really, really heartbreaking. Yeah.